Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and this is a review of a film that I've been meaning to check out for a while. It's on Hulu, and it's a film that I've seen pop up on horror fan pages on Facebook. A lot of times when people are asking for extreme or most fucked up films, so of course I have to check it out. I have heard of it prior to that, but it is Lars von Trier's 2018 film, The House That Jack Built. Now, while it's a psychological art house film, definitely art house, which is what von Trier is known for, controversial art house films. He also did Antichrist, which I saw years ago. Don't remember much from it. That was from a not great period when I saw it. So while it is psychological horror and art house, I don't quite know if I would add this or consider this extreme. I don't even know if I'd call it elevated. More elevated than extreme, probably. But what this is it's a look and a discussion into the life of this serial killer named Jack. Of course, this was written by, the screenplay by, and directed by Lars von Trier. It stars Matt Dillon as Jack and Bruno Ganz as... There's a voiceover between the two of them having this conversation. Of course, I know him as Harker from the Nosferatu remake from '79. And it's broken up into chapters or incidents, 1 through 5. And it's basically talks about Jack wanting to build this house in between his kills. He's a serial killer. And while being talked, I don't want to get into spoilers, but it does also deal with the Dante's Layers of Hell. And the incidents are significant kills that he's had throughout his life. Of course, Matt Dillon took great inspiration from Ted Bundy for his performance because he really is this sort of charming, intelligent, very narcissistic, sociopathic killer who's also very intelligent. But and I know the term gets into the mind of a killer is used very loosely, even to describe films like Rob Zombie's Halloween, which, if you think that, I'm not going to take it from you, but that really is the most generic look at how one becomes a serial killer. This looks at his struggles with OCD, his bipolar or manic episodes. Like, in one scene, in one incident, we see him going from charming and quick to manic and angry to really depressive, back to angry, then back to quick thinking. Which is what Bundy, during his evaluations, was said to be very manic depressive. It would have fits and outbursts. And his OCD, like the beginning, and pretty much his decline through all that. Because the beginning of the film, he does appear as this very well-dressed, combed hair individual. And as the film goes on, his hair gets more unkempt, his clothing becomes more disassociated with reality. And with each kill, we hear this conversation between Jack and Virgil, played by Gans, who is supposed to be sort of this representation of Virgil, the sort of how would you describe him? Like a Roman poet who appears in several stories, who will walk him through Dante's Inferno. And each kill, they talk about various things, like talking him calling himself an architect and an engineer who can build this house any way he wants, but he keeps finding problems with it and has to start over. And pretty much and tries to rationalize his murders in the forms of grand art. Whereas Virgil sees it as, you know, really good and evil, essentially, talking about different forms of art. And some of them are very interesting. And of course, it's all spliced together with, you know, various stock footage of different things like World War II, footage from Von Trier's previous films. There's a continuous shot of him by his red van holding cue cards, sort of walking through certain things that he's saying. And just a lot of things are very interesting, like the analogy of, and this is earlier on in the film, the analogy of pleasure and relaxation versus torment and pain and displeasure in between kills. And this is put together through like animation to look like sketch or painting of a man walking under a streetlight. When his shadow is the most dense is when he's directly under a light, but his shadow is the smallest. So as he walks in between streetlights, the pleasure shadow in front of him gets smaller and less dense as the pain and displeasure gets bigger and more dense. I thought that was, very striking and interesting. And I can see why some people would call this some part of some sort of extremity movement. Definitely for more mainstream audiences, absolutely. I can't argue that. Towards the ending, it does get a little different. I don't want to get into. I don't want to really spoil it. It is 2.5 hours, but it never felt boring. It also stars Uma Thurman. Where the hell's the cast here? Oh, Uma Thurman. I never knew how to pronounce her name. Simon Fallon, Sophie Gabrol, Riley Keough, who was in The Lodge. She was the dad's girlfriend in The Lodge. Excuse me, and Jeremy Davies, who plays gun store owner. And I know I've seen him in other things. He was in Twister, Saving Private Ryan, which I've never seen. I know. He was in Rescue Dawn. He played Richie in Justice League Dark. Okay. And pretty much it's him telling the story, going through his kills. Like, the first one is Uma Thurman, who's having car problems. And he picks her up, takes her to this place, goes back to her car to fix it, doesn't work. Well, fix her jack so she can jack it up. And she seems obsessed with serial killers. Like, you look like a serial killer, and, if you were a killer, you could just, or I could hit you with this jack, do a lot of damage. Oh, well, you took me to see the guy that can fix my jack. He's seen us together, so now it'd be stupid for you to kill me. But of course he does. And I mean, that's not really spoiling it. Pretty much anyone he talks to throughout each one of these stories, he's going to kill. I'm not going to get too much into the psychological or poetic, because it is very poetic at times, or real discussions about the kills. I don't really want to go into every aspect. I do want people to experience it. Nor am I going to try to explain it. But, actually, I'm just going to get into spoilers now, because it'll be hard to talk about without spoilers. It does have some grisly moments, some suspense and intense moments. It does have some shocking stuff in it. So it's definitely a good serial killer film. Very, very artistic. I mean, if you're a fan of his film Antichrist, you'll like this. If you're not an art house fan and you think they're kind of pretentious, you're probably not going to like it. Again, I don't really know what the difference between art house and elevated is. But, I know there is a definition. I know it's not up to opinion, because things are what they are. But, can I recommend it? Sure. I mean, try it out. I enjoyed it. Not so much the ending. I mean, the ending was interesting. Totally. It felt like it took kind of a leap. But I'm going to get into spoilers now. The second incident, which is the one with Simon Fallon, he's trying to get into her house, talks like he's a cop, but then like an insurance guy. Seems like he's kind of stuttering, not really making things up or quick on his feet, but he has the charm to him. Sometimes I thought he looked like Bruce Campbell, which I thought that this would be an interesting ass movie for Bruce Campbell. And then there were some scenes I thought he looked like Jim Carrey. I just did. And this is the scene where we see him go from collected and charming to when he gets into her house trying to strangle her and he gets really angry and sort of like a fit of rage. Then she's still alive and he gets very like apologetic and sad. But then he gets right back into a fit of rage when he strangles her again. And this is where some of the suspense is because... And it shows his OCD because he gets her out into his van and he just has these visions of, oh, I didn't clean under the rug or under the lamp. There's blood under there, so he has to go back in and clean it, even though we hear sirens coming. Gets back into his van. It's like, oh, shit, I didn't look under the leg of this chair, so he has to go back in. The cop comes or stops at a house, so he hides her wrapped body in a bush. And the cop's actually investigating a robbery, not so much a murder or an invasion. And so he acts like he's a friend of hers. Like, oh, I came here to get magazines from her. I was friends of her husband's because he looked around and saw something of her husband's. Acting suspicious the whole time. In scenes like this, like when someone is guilty but they're in a tight spot, even if they're not likable people, it's very anxiety filled. And even the cops like, all right, you know what, just get out of here. Because he picks something up and he's touching it. He's like, okay, you're contaminated, just go. He even ties her he checks his van. His van was empty because he hit her body in the bush. And watching this, I was like, holy fuck, that's going to upset his OCD. He ties her to the back of his van and just drags her. And we see this trail of blood as the road just skids her face off. And he owns this meat freezer on this one street, this abandoned building where he stores all the bodies. And when he notices the blood trail, the rain comes and washes it away. So he talks about how he has like this watcher, this guardian kind of protecting him. And he says how eventually the OCD goes away. It gets a little bit more careless. I would say this next one is probably would be the most shocking for people. Because eventually him and Virgil talk about romance and how there's no love with art without love. So he talks about how he had this girlfriend with 2 young boys. And he takes him out to this woods clearing for a picnic and a hunting lesson. By this point, he has a mustache, he's wearing flannel, and he's teaching the boys about, hunter safety, gun safety, and all of a sudden it cuts to her and the boys hiding with him shooting at them. And he was talking to Virgil about, you know, pretty much comparing this act to hunting. Like, do you kill the two fawns to see how the doe reacts? Or do you kill the doe because the fawn won't survive? Something like that. It's kind of hard to remember every little detail like this, even just after seeing it once. Probably should watch this a couple times for reviewing it. But he does kill both sons. It doesn't quite show it. And then he, fixes up the picnic while propping their corpses up. And you can tell the mom is traumatized. He shot one kid in the head. Feeding the kid pie. Asks her favorite number. She says 12. So he counts to 12. And of course, that's her time to run away. And he shoots her. And then he talks about how with this freezer, he can prop the bodies in any way he wants with pipe cleaners or coat hangers. And then when they're frozen, take it away and they're in all these positions. And one of the boys has this horrific grin, which kind of looks like Robin from Return of the Joker. Is very eerie looking, like this garish grin, blood-filled grin on a small child. Then he gets a little bit of BTK, Dennis Rader, because he puts his victims in these sick positions with this old Polaroid, signs the pictures, Mr. Sophistication, so that's his moniker to the media. The next incident, because he talks about this one relationship he had, and this is with Riley Keough, which is this blonde woman that he keeps tearing down, calling stupid, talking about architecture and engineering, which he then asks for a red marker, which she allows him to take her shirt down and trace her breasts with red lines. That's when she gets weirded out, runs outside, talks to a cop because he admits to killing 60 people. And then, of course, he goes out to the cop and acts drunk, admits to killing 60 people. Cop doesn't believe him. They go back upstairs, and that's when, of course, he kills her. It implies he cuts her tits off, which one he pins to a cop car. The other one we see later fastened to look like a wallet. And we see more and more bodies fill up in the meat locker, and I feel like I'm forgetting an incident. Let's see, there was Uma Thurman, who was the woman with the car problems. The hunting tower, the dysfunctional girlfriend. Okay, the last one. Here we have a lot of stock footage with grand art, and creation of icons, which the icons are some of the greatest mass murderers: Hitler, Mao Zedong, Mussolini, Stalin, and like the dive bombers in World War II, how they created sirens so that when they would dive down, it would create this siren sound. Creating icons. And Virgil calls it sadistic. He calls it, an icon, which is greater than a masterpiece. So this last thing is he has this thing set up with a row of people sort of like so their heads are sort of lined up. And he wants to have one Full Metal Jacket bullet go straight through all of them. Of course, he doesn't have a Full Metal Jacket. And by this point, he looks totally disheveled and out of it. So he goes back to the gun store, and the the guy working there seems completely shaken up and scared of him. When he leaves, he calls someone. He wrecks his van, runs in a friend's house. And this all takes place in the 80s. I forgot. I should have mentioned that in the beginning. Like, in the beginning of the film, it's like 1980, because he talks about the eruption of Mount St. Helens that he could see from his house that he barely started. So I'm guessing it takes place in Washington. It looks like Washington. And so he's in this guy's house. The gun store worker called him. They think he's responsible for a robbery. So he has Jack at gunpoint. And Jack is a bit amused that this is how he gets caught. He kind of talks to him like a friend because they know each other. Stabs him. Takes his red robe. When the cop comes, he kills the cop. Makes it all the way back to his meat freezer. Leaves the siren on. And he realizes that he doesn't have enough room to really get a clear shot. And there's this room that he hasn't been able to open the whole time he's had this property. Manages to open it, and that's where he meets Virgil for the first time. We're sort of led to believe that Virgil is like his lawyer or his sort of like his counselor after he's been caught. But he's like this sort of ominous, more like this entity that says he's been following him his whole life. And we see snapshots of his murders where he was watching from the background. As the police are closing in on the freezer, they go down this hole. And now they're pretty much in the depths of hell. He walks him through the different circles of hell. Like, they look over the Elysian Forest or Elysian Mountain, whatever it is. Then they end up in this final place where it's this endless pit going down to the 9th circle in the center of hell. There's this bridge that's broken. The other side of the bridge will lead out of hell. And Jack thinks he can scale the wall across. No one's ever made it. And he doesn't. Film ends. Which, when he falls in, freeze frame goes to negative. Which, this is what I meant by the ending feels totally different, even though it's been an art house film throughout. Because, I mean, there's like this one long shot of barely moving slow-mo of them on like a boat with these like religious painting, naked figures holding the boat up, and the music. Just, it doesn't really say if he's really going through the depths of hell or if his mind has just cracked and it's a delusion. It's an art house film. I'm sure you can make with it what you want. I'm sure someone will correct me. But I was just like, I mean, I guess it does fit because of the discussion in the whole art house with different stock footage and everything else. It kind of took me out of the film a bit, so I wasn't the biggest fan of that. I know having him die was Lars von Trier's sort of Hitchcock moment. He didn't want the bad guy to live. He wanted the bad guy to die in the way a Hitchcock film would. So he said that was his Hitchcock moment. Ultimately, I can say I liked the film. Did I fully understand it? Probably not. This is one of the most artsy art house films that I've seen. I mean, I know a lot of the ones in my art house playlists. I do understand. I do get even some of all the elevated horror films like Midsommar, Hereditary, all that. I understood that. This was Eraserhead. I understood that. Eraserhead's actually pretty easy. But this one was way out there with its artistic approach. And from what I remember, Antichrist was like this too. And I think Antichrist is still on Netflix, so I'll have to get to that eventually. As a look at a serial killer type film, more so than In the Mind of a Serial Killer, like Halloween, it's definitely more that than Halloween, sure. Sorry I keep doing that. I know it's gross. Elegy season, which for me, it's every season. It was never boring. I really liked Matt Dillon's performance. Can definitely see the Ted Bundy in his performance. I like the descent of his character. Um, the kills and everything weren't really as extreme as you would expect with the term extreme. But, I still enjoyed it. It had its shocking moments, sure. It was definitely a very interesting film. Definitely a different art house style than, say, Begotten, which was definitely more my taste. I can say I liked Begotten more as a film, but I did like this film. Even if, and I thought the discussions between Jack and Virgil were very interesting. Ugh, sorry, I had a lot of Monster today, so I'm not feeling too well. Maybe this was just too artsy for my taste. I don't know. I mean, I understand the elevated horror films I talked about. Maybe this was just way too artsy. I don't know. I did enjoy the film, though. Hopefully, this review was good enough. I know I left out a lot. I know there's a lot of discussions and aspects about the film and shots that I could have talked about. But it's a 2.5 hour film with a lot of shit going into it, so this would have been a very long review. This was the best I could have done for it, but that is the house that Jack built, so hopefully you liked it, and thank you for watching.